There I was in the waking sands again, with Minfilia asking me to do some quests for her. Yet, I wanted to do so many other things. A divide grew in me. I wanted to see the story through, and wondered if delaying my time through it meant it'd be harder to finish. Part of me wanted to avoid the delay. There's still a lot of story to get through in Final Fantasy XIV. But when I thought about what I wanted to do, which was start leveling some other jobs, I felt a bit of shame and guilt for not pushing my way through my ultimate goal of finishing the game's story. I didn't want to drop the ball here and fail again. I have a huge backlog for everything from books to movies, and yes, to games. This backlog stems from the fact that these things take a long time for me to get through. I'm still trying to beat Final Fantasy Tactics, and that came out in September of last year. I have this strange system for dealing with these sorts of issues. I look up about how long it takes to beat the game, then I break that down over the course of several days, and then I try to hit those hours as best I can. This method has obviously been really successful. I do the same thing with books. Books are composed of chapters, so I'll look ahead to determine how many pages I need to read. Once they've been read, I'm safe to move on with the rest of my day. This makes me miserable, and I know it does because of the Randy J. Patterson book, How to Be Miserable, where he describes that even if we have actionable, immediate goals, as long as we're still hung up on the ultimate goal, in this case finishing the book, we will have a relentless stream of no's make their way straight to the part of the brain that's responsible for understanding our progress.
If there are 50 steps in the process, you will get 49 identical answers of not yet. And because this continual discouragement will degrade your interest and motivation, you are likely to give up long before you reach the success of your ultimate goal, thus making the sense of failure permanent.
My backlog just keeps growing in length, and it's not providing much to my life. Will my kids really be happy if I leave them this vast collection of books when I, myself, haven't even given them the time of day? Sure, my Steam library is purely digital, but my physical book collection isn't. They have to contend with that, which makes it even clearer how much of a failure I am for not reading through these books. When you think like this, you're skeptical of every purchase you make. Something may look fun, but when will you get around to it? This makes really short games or books attractive since they seem far more approachable. So with all that said, why on earth would you ever take on an MMORPG? I am a fan of the Final Fantasy series. I can't say I'm a huge fan because I've only played a few of the games, but I like its world, its characters, and all the games I've played. This did not make Final Fantasy XIV more appealing though. A few things stood in the way of me starting the game. It has a notoriously slow start. The game is live service, and I have never played an MMO in my life. Meaning if I fail, my entire team is going to know about it. It's like trying to get into a 50-hour version of Citizen Kane while watching in a language you don't understand. You know that you won't be able to show it to others in a few years' time, and while viewing it, you have to speak to other people about your thoughts on the movie. If they're the wrong thoughts, by the way, they'll burn you alive. This might be the reason that people just generally don't get into MMOs. They can be huge time sinks, which require some effort to properly understand. So, what compelled me to play the game? It was marketed really well.
Of darkness.
14 has a couple of things going for it that make it a more approachable MMO for someone like myself. Firstly, the game is supposed to improve by the time you finish A Realm Reborn. If I wanted to experience that story, what people often call one of the best stories in games, I'd have to jump into it. There are also a lot of nice features that make it easier for a person to get through the game by themselves. Almost all of the main story quests can be done solo, and if you just want to run a dungeon without anyone else in the party, you absolutely can. Doing dungeons by myself was a real boon, because I was terrified of actually getting into the game and having my party discover how much I suck at playing the game. Finally, the game had a way of getting around the monthly subscription. You see, I was worried I would end up subscribing and then forgetting to play for months on end, paying Square Enix all the while. This can actually be avoided with the time cards you can buy from Square directly. These give you just 2 months of playtime, and then you don't have to worry about the game taking more of your money. This helped me feel secure that I wasn't going to overpay for the game over time. All of these factors helped ease the concerns I had with getting into an MMORPG, and I'm glad that Square Enix put them in to give people options for how they want to experience the game. At the time, these were the factors that helped me take the dive into the game, and feel confident that what I was getting wasn't something that could be easily affected by player counts or my own negligence. I had a pretty easy time setting up the game and building a character. I like swords and I like shields, so I ended up picking Gladiator as my initial job. While this is sort of an innocuous decision for now, it put me into the tank class role, a decision I wouldn't fully comprehend until later. From there, it was as simple as choosing a male in the most elf-like race, the Elazan, and booting up into Ul'dah. This means I started in Thanalan, which is a big desert. While I didn't know this at the time, your job determines your starting zone, and I probably would have preferred starting in something like Gridania or Limsa Lominsa to have more green grass and tall trees. In spite of that though, I eventually grew very fond of Thanalan. It's the area I was most familiar with during my playthrough. I suppose I got attached to the wastes. Here, I was also learning how an MMORPG worked. While some of the aspects of my build wouldn't come into focus until later, I got a basic understanding of how to play because I made sure I read through everything that the game handed to me throughout its initial hours. This meant reading through all of the tutorials so I can get a clear understanding of how exactly this game worked and how it wanted me to play it, which I learned was doing damage at all times. You have a lot of abilities, many of them meant to help you perform your role. You got defensive buffs for tanks, damage buffs for DPS, and healing for support. Even so, everyone in this game has damage abilities. The game wants you to be using those abilities as frequently as possible, meaning that even though I'm supposed to soak up damage as a tank and make sure I'm constantly defending myself, I also need to continue to attack enemies while I do so. As a result of this, 14 quickly becomes a game about minimizing time you're not using your abilities, while also managing your self-made buffs and your own resources like health and MP. Each ability has a pretty clear description for you to read, and even thinking about it critically for a few moments should make it clear with how it fits into the character's overall kit. Originally, I had a large rant about how people in gaming spaces seem to hate reading. I implore everyone who hates reading to please just give it a shot. In most cases, the game is doing a fine job of presenting information to you. You just have to read it. My commitment to read everything also helped me understand early on that Final Fantasy XIV was focused on presenting its story first and foremost. Much like an actual JRPG, there's a huge divide between what you'll be doing during gameplay time and what you will be doing during story time. While the divide might frustrate some people, it was nice for me to be able to focus on just playing the game or just experiencing the story. I didn't always have to do both. The game was willing to give me the space to take my time with things. Before I knew it, I was in the rhythm of the game. I'd been getting more and more powerful, taking on my job quests along with the main story quests, and was having a decent time doing so. Final Fantasy XIV may have had a lot of systems to learn, but the slow burn of mechanics actually helps a ton with understanding of those systems, so you can actually perform when the time comes. That said, I still ran into some hurdles. While I have a more positive disposition toward Realm Reborn than I think most people do, I still think that some of its quests suck. I actually don't mind talking to NPCs as a quest, if it's narratively significant. I can even emote to NPCs if the narrative calls for it. However, I really struggle with the few quests where the game, both narratively and mechanically, makes you do chores. Many of the quests in the game are built around the idea that your character is explicitly doing busy work meant for some unpaid intern. While you're not the warrior of light yet, by the mid-game you're still pretty notable, which means these quests just make even less sense. There may be some plot reveals waiting to happen here, but it is truly astonishing the amount of work you put in for A Realm Reborn, just for some guy to get a sack full of crystals. Another hurdle I had was actually one of my positives earlier. When I said I could play this game solo, I was excited because I wasn't going to end up bothering people. Yet when I actually play the game, I felt a little left out. Even as I write this, I'm struggling to really build connections with people in the game. This wasn't something I was expecting at all, but I think in seeing how well the FF14 community treats one another, there was a feeling of missing out on that. Not to say there aren't resources to connect with others, but in my brief time playing classic World of Warcraft, I felt there was a much larger sense of community even while playing solo. People just yapped in general chat about quests, remembering where things were in the game, and just plain bullshitting. Meanwhile, most of the 14 general chat was very quiet, and I barely heard anything. This comes down to the difference in mentality I think 14 has compared to Classic WoW. When Classic was originally made, the game was focused on providing a social experience with a game, whereas I think 14 is primarily focused on being a game with some social experiences within it. This means that Classic WoW has a lot of systems which rely on its community, whereas 14 has relatively few systems focusing on that. In spite of these two big hurdles, I was still having a good time with the game up until things in my life took a turn for the busy. Eventually, I was stopped in my tracks from playing the game. I was focused on my career, on my YouTube channel, and frankly just on other games. It was appropriate to take a break until I had an urge to come back later. During this time, I got to play a lot of games and refocus back on my YouTube channel a bit. I really enjoyed playing Final Fantasy Tactics and Warcraft 3, which were both games I was really excited to try out when I first heard of them. I also got some time with Classic WoW, which provided me with further perspective on 14's influences and where certain ideas had come from. It was a time of discovery for me. To my surprise though, I had intended to eventually come back. I was happy to take a break and thankful that my subscription wouldn't renew during it, but I felt this urge to come back all the time. People had strong opinions about the latest expansion, they were releasing new patch content, and overall, I just heard about it a lot more because I started following the Final Fantasy XIV accounts on social media. I was constantly reminded of the game, which meant I felt very strongly a need to eventually come back to it. Earlier last month, I came back with fresh eyes on the game, and man, did I miss it. There's just something so fun about being a tank and grabbing aggro from a bunch of enemies and fighting them with your team. Tanking is something I see a lot of people feel pressure about playing, but I think it's cool to be in a pseudo-leadership role in the party. You and your healer control the pace of the dungeon, which means you get to call the shots when it comes to taking breaks, and when you're feeling strong enough to grab another group of monsters. The tank is an important role, but it's still just so fun to work with your fellow party members to absolutely demolish a dungeon. Most of my time wasn't in dungeons though. Most of my time was working through the main story quest and finishing A Realm Reborn. The final moments of the game's story are actually quite good. It probably helps that the earlier moments were just a memory for me, but working through the ending really made me appreciate the story of ARR more thoroughly. Maybe it's because I'm also living in a world where after a global catastrophe, opposition is pushing further than it ever has before, and we have to decide to be brave despite the risk of losing everything being so high, but the story really elevated itself here. I love the way that at the final stretch, hope becomes something we learn not only to give others, but to give ourselves in times of great disaster. Believing that, in spite of our differences, we can still fight for something worth fighting for. While you could read a metatextual meaning in all of this, the big thing is that fighting for a future you want is worth it, even if you've experienced a terrible past. That really resonated with me in the final hours of the game. While there were still things happening in the lore, and the game was still working on setting up future events, I feel satisfied with this story already. On top of that, I had actually completed A Realm Reborn. That was beyond what I was expecting for myself. I was astonished that I had actually done my part and completed the game. It wasn't even like pulling teeth at all, I just enjoyed the ride to the end. That palpable sense of accomplishment washing over me. In spite of the game being a lot to learn, in spite of the amount of time it had to take, I had conquered it. I did it even when I thought all hope was lost and I wasn't capable of finishing it. I maybe didn't beat all of Final Fantasy XIV, but I felt way more confident in my ability to do things like read long books, or play long games, or get through the rest of it. With the credits rolling, I had a lot of thoughts about what I wanted to do next. There are jobs on jobs on jobs in Final Fantasy XIV, and I wanted to try out quite a lot of them. Primarily, I wanted to try leveling Dragoon, because I think it's the coolest character archetype in Final Fantasy. I also wanted to try out a caster, so Black Mage seemed like a ton of fun. I also knew I wanted to switch from Paladin to Dark Knight, because that questline is supposed to be very good, and I just like the idea of transforming into a Dark Knight after being a Paladin for so long. Then, after the credits roll, and the patch content becomes clearer, the game pushed me to continue the main story. There I was in the Waking Sands again, with Minfilia asking me to do some quests for her. Yet, I wanted to do so many other things. A divide grew in me. I wanted to see this story through, and wondered if delaying my time through it meant it'd be harder to finish. Part of me wanted to avoid the delay. There's still a lot of story to get through in Final Fantasy XIV. But when I thought about what I wanted to do, which was start leveling some other jobs, I felt a bit of shame and guilt for not pushing my way through my ultimate goal of finishing the game's story. I didn't want to drop the ball here and fail again. Then, a sudden revelation came into my mind, like a pool of collective experiences washing over me. Memories of shows I had watched, philosophy I read, and yes, games I've played, suddenly flew into my mind. Despite me reaching one of my goals, ready to move on to another, I felt the exact same way as I did at the start. In spite of me wanting to move on and do something different, I was already in the process of shaming myself for wanting to put off completing the ultimate goal. I realized I was letting that shame run my experiences, not just with Final Fantasy XIV, but with my backlog as a whole. That urgency I had felt to complete media came from shame, not really enjoyment of the piece. Once I realized that, my mission became clear. So I leveled Rogue, and most of the footage I use in this video is when I was leveling Lancer and Dragoon. While I still want to finish A Realm Reborn and get to Heavensward, I'm no longer feeling urged to in the same way I was before. I'm not shaming myself for working on something else for a few days, or even just doing other things. It's odd because it's not a moment in my life that made me feel this way, but a moment in a video game with fake fantasy elves and an excess of belts. It was silly, in other words, but it helped me find out something about myself. It might have helped change my life. At this point, I've only scratched the surface of Final Fantasy XIV, and I hope to continue digging deeper into this experience. I didn't even really get to talk about dungeons or how I started partying with real people, which made the game so much more fun. Hopefully I can share that fun with you, motivated by genuine interest rather than shame and guilt of not having completed something. When using guilt to motivate, it doesn't matter how well you systematize your reading or gaming. You're going to fail at making lasting changes that way. Although, maybe the lasting change doesn't need to come from playing an MMO for 50 plus hours. During that whole moment of considering continuing the main quest, I was remembering a lot of games, books, and shows telling me how important the journey was rather than the destination. That the focus on the ultimate goal can distract you from the actual beauty of the activity you're doing. While I've always understood these messages intellectually, I didn't really feel the change until it happened to me directly. Until I took the plunge to focus more on the journey of Final Fantasy XIV rather than the destination of endgame content. Some lessons you just have to learn on your own, I suppose. If people like these types of videos, I can make more about 14 in the future, but if you're new, I mainly talk about tabletop role-playing games on the channel, mostly focused on games that aren't D&D. Whether you decide to stay or go, I hope you have a good day, and focus on doing things you enjoy because you enjoy them.